Captain Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his forehead as he watched the mining robots work on the asteroid. The New Hope floated silently in space, its cargo hold almost full of rare metals. Jake had been doing this job for 12 years now, ever since Earth joined the Galactic Coalition. The work was hard and dangerous, but someone had to do it. "Captain, we're getting a message from Coalition Command," said his communications officer, a young woman named Lisa Carter. She had joined his crew just 6 months ago, fresh from the Science Academy on Mars. Jake walked over to the communication panel. The face of Admiral Kevin Blake appeared on the screen. Blake looked worried, which was unusual for the tough old soldier. "Jake, you need to return to Earth immediately," Blake said. "All human ships are being recalled. Something big is happening." "What kind of something?" Jake asked. "The kind that could end everything we know," Blake replied. "Just get back here as fast as you can." The transmission ended, leaving Jake staring at the blank screen. In all his years working for the Coalition, he had never seen an order like this. Human ships were scattered across the galaxy, mining, fighting, and exploring. To call them all back meant something terrible was coming. "Set course for Earth," Jake told his pilot. "Best speed." As the New Hope jumped into hyperspace, Jake thought about his life. He had been proud to serve the Coalition. Humans were the newest members, but they had proven themselves useful. They could work in conditions that killed other species. They could fight battles that others were afraid to fight. They were the backbone of the Coalition's expansion into dangerous sectors of the galaxy. 3 days later, Jake stood in the Great Assembly Hall on Earth. Thousands of human military officers and civilian leaders had gathered. Admiral Blake stood at the front, his face grim. "Ladies and gentlemen," Blake began, "we face the greatest threat in galactic history. 3 weeks ago, our long-range scouts detected a massive alien fleet approaching from the galactic rim. They call themselves the Devourers, and they live up to their name." Images flashed on the screen behind Blake. Worlds stripped bare of all life. Space stations torn apart and consumed. Entire star systems left as empty husks. "The Devourers consume everything," Blake continued. "They eat planets, space stations, ships, and all living things. They've already destroyed 17 star systems on the outer rim. At their current speed, they'll reach Coalition space in 6 months." A murmur of fear rippled through the crowd. Jake felt his stomach tighten. He had fought in 3 wars for the Coalition, but nothing like this. "What's the Coalition's plan?" asked Commander Amy Rogers, who led the human settlement on Proxima 4. Blake's expression grew even darker. "That's why you're all here. The Coalition Council is meeting on Centauri Prime right now to decide our response. Every species gets to vote on the strategy." Jake waited for Blake to continue, but the Admiral just stood there, his hands clenched into fists. "Sir?" Jake prompted. "The Coalition has decided that some territories are too expensive to defend," Blake said slowly. "They're going to pull back their fleets and create a defensive line around the core worlds." "That makes sense," said Dr. Lisa Carter, who had come to Earth with Jake. "You defend what you can and sacrifice what you must." Blake looked at her with sad eyes. "Lisa, they're not sacrificing empty worlds. They're sacrificing us." The hall erupted in shocked voices. Jake felt like someone had punched him in the chest. "What do you mean?" Rogers demanded. "The vote was 847 to 1, Blake said. "Every species voted to abandon all human territories and populations. They say we're expendable. They say our worlds are acceptable losses to buy time for the evacuation of more valuable species." Jake couldn't believe what he was hearing. For over a century, humans had served the Coalition faithfully. They had died in Coalition wars, built Coalition stations, and mined Coalition resources. Now, when the greatest threat in history appeared, they were being thrown away like garbage. "They can't do this," Jake said. "We're Coalition citizens, we have rights." "Apparently not," Blake replied. "The Zephyrian ambassador said that humans are a young species that hasn't proven their long-term value." The crystalline representative argued that human worlds are on the outer rim anyway, so they'll be consumed first regardless. Even the species we've saved in past wars voted against us. Dr. Carter stood up, her face pale. "How long do we have?" 72 hours, Blake said. All coalition fleets will withdraw from human space. All communication channels will be cut. We'll be on our own." The hall fell silent. Jake looked around at the faces of his fellow humans. Some were angry, some were afraid, but all of them looked betrayed. They had trusted the coalition, and the coalition had stabbed them in the back. "What about our colonies?" Rogers asked. "Proxima 4 has 2 million people. New Shanghai has 5 million. Mars has over 50 million. The coalition says they're sorry for the loss of human life," Blake said bitterly. "They've offered to take a few thousand humans as refugees, but only if they renounce their human citizenship and serve the coalition as individuals, not as representatives of humanity." Jake felt rage building in his chest. "They want us to abandon our own people to save ourselves?" "That's the offer," Blake confirmed. "And if we refuse? Then we face the Devourers alone." The next 2 days passed in a blur of desperate activity. Human ships raced across the galaxy, trying to evacuate as many people as possible from the outer colonies. But there wasn't enough time or ships to save everyone. Jake watched from his bridge as coalition ships withdrew from the mining stations he had spent years protecting. Alien crews that had worked alongside humans for decades now looked away when they passed human ships. The betrayal was complete. On the third day, Jake received his final transmission from a coalition vessel. It was from a Zephyrian captain he had served with in the Rigel campaign. "I'm sorry, Jake," the alien said. "I voted against this in my ship's council, but I was outvoted. Good luck." Then the communication cut out, and Jake knew he would never speak to a coalition officer again. Hours later, the Devourer scouts arrived at the edge of human space. Jake watched on his sensors as the first human colony went silent. Then another, and another. The galaxy had abandoned humanity to die. Now, the question was whether humanity would survive long enough to make them regret that decision. 5 years had passed since the coalition abandoned humanity. The galaxy believed humans were extinct. Coalition news reports spoke of the brave sacrifice of the human species, as if they had chosen to die instead of being thrown away like trash. Captain Jake Morrison crouched behind the twisted metal remains of what used to be Mining Station Alpha 7. His ship, the New Hope, was hidden in the asteroid field nearby, along with 12 other human vessels. They called themselves the Ghost Fleet now, because officially they didn't exist anymore. Jake pressed his hand to his earpiece. "Lisa, what do you see?" Dr. Lisa Carter was 2 kilometers away, scanning the wreckage with her equipment. 3 Devourer scouts are still patrolling the area, she whispered back. "But Jake, I'm picking up something else. There are human life signs in the deep sections of the station." Jake's heart jumped. After 5 years of running and hiding, finding survivors still felt like a miracle. "How many?" "Maybe 30 people. They're in the old mining tunnels, probably been hiding there since the attack." Jake looked at his team. They were all thin and tired, wearing patched uniforms and carrying weapons they had built from scraps. But their eyes were hard and determined. These were people who had learned to survive when the entire galaxy wanted them dead. "Tommy, take your squad and create a distraction on the far side of the station," Jake ordered. "Make noise, draw those scouts away, the rest of us will get those people out." Tommy Chen nodded and disappeared into the shadows with 3 other fighters. Jake had saved Tommy from a transport ship that was being torn apart by Devourers 2 years ago. Now Tommy was one of his best soldiers. Minutes later, explosions echoed across the station. The Devourer scouts immediately flew toward the noise, their insect-like ships buzzing with anger. Jake smiled grimly. Devourers were smart, but they were predictable. They always went for the loudest threat first. Jake and his team moved quickly through the broken corridors of the station. They found the entrance to the mining tunnels and began descending into the darkness below. "Hello?" Jake called softly. "Is anyone down here? We're human. We're here to help." A weak voice answered from deeper in the tunnel. "We're here. Please, we've been waiting so long." Jake found them huddled in a storage room that they had turned into a shelter. 32 people, mostly miners and their families. They had been living on emergency rations and recycled water for 5 years, too afraid to leave because of the Devourer patrols above. "The Coalition," one of the miners asked. "Did they come back for us?" Jake's jaw tightened. Even after 5 years, some humans still hoped the Coalition would return. "No," he said simply. "They're not coming. But we are." As Jake's team helped the survivors prepare to leave, Lisa approached him with a worried expression. "Jake, I need to show you something. I've been studying the Devourer technology we captured last month." She pulled out a small device covered in organic-looking circuits. "This is part of their mind control system. They use it to take over other species and make them serve the Devourers." "We know this already," Jake said. "But Jake, I tested it on human brain patterns. It doesn't work on us at all. Our brains are completely immune to their control technology." Jake stared at her. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that humans are the only species in the galaxy that can't be controlled by the Devourers. And there's more. Remember how we've been able to disrupt their communications when we attack? I think our brainwaves actually interfere with their hive mind connection." Before Jake could respond, Tommy's voice crackled over the radio. "Captain, we've got problems. More Devourer ships are coming. Lots more." Jake looked at the survivors, then at Lisa. "How long to get everyone to the ship?" 10 minutes if we move fast," Lisa replied. "Tommy, how long until those ships get here?" 5 minutes, maybe less." Jake made his decision. "Everyone move now. Tommy, fall back to the ship. We're leaving." They ran through the broken station as the sound of Devourer ships grew louder overhead. Jake carried an injured miner while Lisa helped an elderly woman who could barely walk. Behind them, they could hear the terrible screech of Devourer weapons, cutting through metal. They reached their ship just as the first Devourer fighters appeared around the asteroid. Jake's pilot, a former Coalition officer named Danny Brooks, already had the engines warming up. "Everyone strap in," Jake yelled as they climbed aboard. "This is going to be rough." The New Hope shot out of the asteroid field just as Devourer ships swarmed the area where they had been hiding. Jake watched on his screen as the aliens searched frantically for the humans who had just vanished. "Where are we taking them?" Danny asked. "Safe Harbor," Jake replied. Safe Harbor was what they called the secret base Admiral Kevin Blake had built in the outer system of Sol. It was hidden in an asteroid that had been hollowed out and turned into a small city. 3,000 human survivors lived there now, all rescued from various attacks over the past 5 years. As they traveled toward Safe Harbor, Jake sat with Lisa in the ship's small laboratory. She was still studying the Devourer technology, and her discoveries were getting more interesting every day. "Jake, I've been thinking about something," Lisa said. "The Coalition didn't just abandon us because they thought we were expendable. I've been going through old Coalition databases that we salvaged, and I found something disturbing." She showed him a file on her computer screen. It was marked with high security clearances and dated from before the Devourer invasion. "This is a study the Coalition did on human psychology and capabilities," Lisa explained. "They were worried about us, Jake, really worried." Jake read through the document. It talked about human adaptability, human aggression, and human technological development. The conclusion was clear. Humans were considered a potential threat to the established galactic order. "They were afraid of us," Jake said quietly. "More than afraid. Look at this projection they made." Lisa pointed to a chart. "They predicted that within 200 years, humans would either be running the Coalition or would have left it to build their own empire." Jake felt a cold anger growing in his chest. "So when the Devourers came, they saw their chance to get rid of us." "That's what I think. They used the invasion as an excuse to eliminate what they saw as a future threat." Jake stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Coalition species were still fighting the Devourers, still losing worlds and populations. They had thrown away their best chance for survival because they were afraid of human potential. "Have you told Admiral Blake about this?" Jake asked. "Not yet. I wanted to tell you first." Jake nodded. "Good. We need to think about what this means." 2 days later, they arrived at Safe Harbor. Jake watched as the rescued miners and their families were welcomed by other survivors. Children who had never seen their homeworlds laughed and played in the artificial gardens that the survivors had built. But Jake wasn't thinking about celebration. He was thinking about Lisa's discovery and about the 3,000 humans who now lived in this hidden base. 3,000 people who had been betrayed by the galaxy they had served. Admiral Blake met them at the docking bay. He looked older than his 60 years, but his eyes were still sharp and determined. "How many this time?" Blake asked. 32, Jake replied. "Admiral, we need to talk. Lisa found something important." Later that night, Jake, Lisa, and Blake sat in Blake's office deep inside the asteroid. Lisa explained her discoveries about human immunity to devourer control and the old coalition files about human potential. Blake listened quietly, his face growing darker with each revelation. When Lisa finished, he was quiet for a long time. "So, they were planning to get rid of us even before the devourers came," Blake finally said. "It looks that way," Lisa confirmed. Blake stood up and walked to a wall covered with photos of human colonies that had been destroyed. 3,000 survivors, he said, out of 50 billion people. Jake and Lisa waited for him to continue. "The coalition thinks we're dead," Blake said. "The devourers think we're beaten. Maybe it's time to show them both how wrong they are." 3 years had passed since the discovery at Safe Harbor. Admiral Kevin Blake stood on the bridge of the Retribution, humanity's first new warship built since the abandonment. The ship was sleek and deadly, designed using everything they had learned about fighting devourers. Around him, the hidden shipyards of Safe Harbor were busy with activity. Dozens of new ships were under construction, all built by human hands using salvage materials and new technology that Dr. Lisa Carter's team had developed. "Admiral, Captain Morrison is reporting in from the Titan VII mission," said Communications Officer Mary Johnson. Blake nodded. Today was the day they would test everything they had built over the past 8 years. Titan VII was a mining world that had been under devourer control for 6 years. The Coalition had written it off as lost, just like they had written off humanity. "Jake." Morrison's face appeared on the main screen. Behind him, Blake could see the bridge of the Ghost Runner, Jake's new ship and flagship of what they now called the Liberation Fleet. "Admiral, we're in position," Jake reported. 30 ships ready for the assault. Lisa confirms that all our new weapons are functioning properly. Blake looked at the tactical display. The Liberation Fleet was small compared to the old Coalition Navy, but every ship was crewed by survivors who had lost everything to the Devourers and the Coalition's betrayal. They were motivated in ways that Coalition forces had never been. "Remember, Jake, this isn't just about taking back one world," Blake said. "This is our announcement to the galaxy that humanity is not dead." "Understood, Admiral. Beginning the attack now." The screen switched to show the battle around Titan VII. Blake watched as human ships dove toward the planet, their new weapons blazing. The Devourers had never faced anything like this before. Dr. Lisa Carter stood beside Blake, watching her inventions in action. The neural disruptor cannons she had designed were tearing through Devourer ships like they were made of paper. The weapons used human brain patterns to create energy waves that completely shut down Devourer technology. "It's working even better than we hoped," Lisa said with satisfaction. "Their ships are going dead in space." On the planet's surface, Commander Amy Rogers was leading the ground assault. She and her team had spent years learning how to fight Devourers in close combat. They moved through the alien-controlled mining facilities like ghosts, their immunity to mind control allowing them to get close enough to plant explosives. "Surface teams report success," came Rogers' voice over the radio. "The Devourer ground forces are retreating. We're taking control of the main mining complex." Blake watched as Devourer ships fled the system. In 3 hours, humanity had achieved what the Coalition thought was impossible. They had completely driven the Devourers away from a world they had controlled for years. "Send the message," Blake ordered. Mary Johnson activated the emergency broadcast system. Blake's message would reach every Coalition world and every Devourer-controlled system in this sector of the galaxy. "This is Admiral Kevin Blake of the Human Liberation Fleet," Blake said into the camera. "Today, humanity has liberated the world of Titan VII from Devourer control. We are not extinct. We are not defeated, and we are no longer interested in coalition membership." He paused, letting his words sink in across the galaxy. "To the Coalition Council that voted to abandon us 8 years ago, we have a simple message. You left us to die. We learned to live. You failed to stop the Devourers. We succeeded. The galaxy will remember which species stood and fought and which species ran away." The message ended, and Blake turned back to the tactical display. Already, Coalition communication networks were buzzing with activity. The impossible had happened. Humanity had not only survived but had become the only force capable of actually defeating the Devourers. 2 weeks later, the Coalition's response arrived. It came in the form of a desperate plea from Coalition Prime Minister Veltor, a crystalline being who had been one of the loudest voices calling for humanity's abandonment. "Admiral Blake," Veltor's message began, "the Coalition Council wishes to express our joy at humanity's survival. We offer immediate restoration of full Coalition membership, along with territorial grants and resource allocations as compensation for past misunderstandings." Blake almost laughed at the word misunderstandings. They hadn't misunderstood anything. The Coalition had deliberately thrown humanity away, and now they wanted help because their own forces were losing badly to the Devourers. "Furthermore," Veltor continued, "we request immediate military assistance against the Devourer threat. Our defensive lines are failing, and we have lost 17 core worlds in the past month. Humanity's unique capabilities appear to be our only hope for survival." The message ended with detailed intelligence reports showing just how desperate the Coalition situation had become. The Devourers were less than 6 months away from reaching the Coalition capital world of Centauri Prime. Blake called a meeting of humanity's leadership. Jake Morrison arrived from the Liberation Fleet, Amy Rogers came from the newly established human colony on Titan 7, and Lisa Carter joined them from her research laboratories. "So," Blake said, "they want our help now." "After they voted 847 to 1 to let us die," Jake said bitterly. "The question is, what do we do about it?" Rogers asked. Lisa pulled up a star map showing the current state of the galaxy. Red zones marked Devourer-controlled space. Blue zones showed Coalition territory, and green zones marked the areas now under human control. "We have 43 worlds now," Lisa said. "All former Coalition territories that we've liberated from the Devourers. Our population has grown to over 2 million, mostly from rescued survivors, and some Coalition refugees who chose to join us." 2 million people, Blake mused, against a coalition of hundreds of species and trillions of beings. "But we're the only ones who can actually fight the Devourers," Jake pointed out. "That makes us more valuable than all of them combined." Rogers leaned forward. "I say we let them burn. They made their choice 8 years ago. Now they can live with the consequences." "That's certainly tempting," Blake admitted. "But there's something else to consider. If the Devourers finish consuming the Coalition, they'll come after us next. We might be immune to their mind control, but they still have superior numbers." Lisa nodded. "The Admiral is right. We need to think strategically. The question isn't whether to help the Coalition. The question is what we want in return." Blake stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the busy construction yards where new human ships were being built every day. "What do we want?" he repeated. "I'll tell you what I want," Jake said. "I want them to pay for what they did to us. I want justice for the 50 billion humans who died because of their betrayal." "Justice," Blake said thoughtfully. "Yes, I think that's exactly what we want." He turned back to the group. "Here's what we're going to do. We're going to save the Coalition from the Devourers, but we're going to do it on our terms, and they're going to pay a price they never imagined." "What kind of price?" Rogers asked. Blake smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant smile. "The kind of price that turned servants into masters. They threw us away when they thought we were weak. Now they're going to learn what we're capable of when we're strong." 3 days later, Blake sent his response to the Coalition. It was short and simple. "Prime Minister Veltor, humanity will provide military assistance against the Devourer threat. However, we will do so as an independent power, not as coalition members. Our forces will operate under human command and will claim any territory we liberate as human space. If these terms are acceptable, we will begin operations immediately. If not, you can face the Devourers alone. The coalition's response came back within hours. It was a single word. Agreed. Blake looked at the message and smiled. The coalition had just agreed to their own conquest, and they didn't even realize it yet. They thought they were hiring humanity as mercenaries. They had no idea they were inviting their future rulers to take control of the galaxy. Jake, Blake said, prepare the fleet. It's time to show the galaxy what humanity learned during our years in the dark. 1 year later, Admiral Kevin Blake stood on the bridge of his flagship as it approached Centauri Prime, the former capital of the Galactic Coalition. The planet hung in space like a dying ember, its cities dark and its orbital stations damaged from constant Devourer attacks. But the Devourers were gone now. Blake's forces had driven them back to the outer rim of the galaxy over the past 12 months. Every world they liberated, every system they cleared, became part of the growing human empire. The coalition had begged for help and humanity had delivered, but the price had been higher than anyone expected. Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the planet, reported Communications Officer Mary Johnson. Put it through, Blake said. The face of Prime Minister Veltor appeared on the screen. The crystalline leader looked much older than he had a year ago. His crystal-like skin was cracked and dull, showing the stress of watching his civilization crumble. Admiral Blake, Veltor, said, on behalf of the Coalition Council, I thank you for driving the Devourers away from our capital world. We are ready to discuss the terms for returning Centauri Prime to Coalition control. Blake almost smiled. Even now, after everything that had happened, Veltor still didn't understand the situation. Prime Minister, Blake said calmly, Centauri Prime was liberated by human forces. According to our agreement, all liberated worlds become part of human space. This planet now belongs to the human empire. Veltor's face showed shock and panic. But Admiral, this is our capital world, the center of our civilization. Surely you don't mean to claim it. I mean exactly that, Blake replied. Just as you meant to abandon us 9 years ago when you voted 847-1 to let humanity die. The transmission cut out and Blake turned to Captain Jake Morrison, who had been standing beside him during the conversation. How many worlds do we control now? Blake asked. 317, Jake replied. Every world we've liberated, from the Devourers, plus dozens of coalition worlds whose populations surrendered to us voluntarily. Blake nodded. It had been easier than he expected. As human forces proved they were the only ones who could defeat the Devourers, coalition species began switching sides. They preferred human rule to Devourer consumption. What about the coalition fleet? Blake asked. Most of their ships have been destroyed or abandoned, Jake said. The few that remain are hiding in the Vega system under the command of Admiral Zeth Prime. Blake remembered Zeth Prime well. The Zephyrian officer had been one of the strongest supporters of abandoning humanity. He had argued that humans were too primitive to deserve coalition protection. Signal the fleet, Blake ordered. We're going to Vega. It's time to finish this. 3 days later, the human fleet arrived at the Vega system. What they found was pathetic. 12 coalition ships hiding behind the system's outer planet, their hulls damaged and their crews desperate. Blake opened a communication channel to the coalition flagship. Admiral Zeth Prime, Blake said. This is Admiral Blake of the Human Empire. You are surrounded and outgunned. Surrender now and your crews will be treated well. Zeth Prime's alien face appeared on the screen. His blue skin was pale with fear, but his eyes still showed defiance. Admiral Blake, Zeth Prime said, I will not surrender to a species that was barely capable of spaceflight when we first contacted them. The coalition may be defeated, but I will not bow to human authority, Blake sighed. Some beings never learned. Zeth Prime, do you remember what you said during the vote to abandon humanity? Blake asked. The alien officer's expression grew uncertain. You said that humans were expendable, Blake continued. You said we were too weak and too primitive to matter. You said the galaxy would be better off without us. The situation was desperate, Zeth Prime protested. Hard choices had to be made. Yes, they did, Blake agreed. And you made the wrong one. You threw away the one species that could have saved you because you were afraid of what we might become. Blake gestured to the tactical display showing the human fleet surrounding the Coalition ships. Look around you, Zeth Prime. This is what we became. You abandoned us when you thought we were weak. Now you face us when we are strong. The result was inevitable. Commander Amy Rogers spoke up from her position at the weapons console. Admiral, the Coalition ships are powering up their weapons. Blake shook his head sadly. Some lessons are learned too late. The battle was over in minutes. The Coalition ships were old and damaged, their crews demoralized by years of losing to the Devourers. The human ships were new and powerful, crewed by people who had spent 9 years preparing for this moment. When the last Coalition ship surrendered, Blake ordered it brought aboard his flagship. Zeth Prime was escorted to the bridge under guard, his uniform torn and his proud bearing broken. The Coalition is finished, Blake told him. Your species threw away their future when they threw away humanity. Now that future belongs to us. What will you do with us? Zeth Prime asked quietly. Blake considered the question. For 9 years he had dreamed of this moment. The moment when the beings who had abandoned humanity would face the consequences of their choice. The same thing you planned to do with us, Blake said. We'll let you live, but under our rules and our protection. You'll serve the human empire just as humanity once served the Coalition. And if we refuse, Blake's expression hardened, then you'll face the Devourers alone, just as you forced us to do. Zeth Prime looked at the floor, his defiance finally broken. I understand. 6 months later, Blake stood in his new office on Centauri Prime, now renamed New Terra, and serving as the capital of the human empire. Through his window, he could see the bustling spaceport where ships from hundreds of worlds came to trade and do business under human authority. Dr. Lisa Carter entered his office carrying a data pad with the latest reports from across the empire. How are we doing, Lisa? Blake asked. Better than anyone expected, she replied. Most of the former Coalition species have adapted well to human rule. They're grateful for protection from the Devourers, and our policies are actually more fair than what the old Coalition provided. Blake nodded. It had been important to him that humanity be better rulers than the Coalition had been. They had learned from their own experience as second-class citizens. What about the Devourers? Blake asked. Contained to the outer rim, Lisa reported. Our new technology keeps them from advancing, and we've actually started pushing them back. I think we can eliminate them completely within 5 years. Blake walked to his window and looked out at the city below. Humans and aliens worked together in the streets, building a new civilization from the ruins of the old one. Jake Morrison wants to see you, Lisa said. He's in the outer office. Jake entered a moment later, still wearing his military uniform, but looking more relaxed than Blake had seen him in years. Admiral, Jake said, I have a question for you. What's that? Do you ever feel guilty about what we've done? Taking over the galaxy, I mean. Blake thought about the question for a long moment. Jake, do you remember the faces of the people we found hiding in those mining tunnels? The families we rescued from destroyed colonies? The children who grew up without homes because the Coalition threw us away? I remember, Jake said quietly. Those people deserved better than what the Coalition gave them, Blake continued. The species we rule now deserve better than what their old leaders gave them. We're not conquering the galaxy for revenge, Jake. We're conquering it because we learned how to do it right. Jake smiled. I can live with that. Blake looked out at the stars beyond his window. Somewhere out there, the last Devourer fleets were being hunted down by human ships. Somewhere else, former Coalition worlds were building new lives under human protection. The beings who had abandoned humanity had learned too late that throwing away your most loyal allies was the fastest way to lose everything. They had feared human potential, so they had tried to destroy it. Instead, they had only made it stronger. Now humanity ruled the galaxy, and the species that had once considered them expendable served under human authority. It was justice, Blake thought. Perfect, complete justice. The abandoned had become the rulers and the galaxy was better for it.